It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Hey there, hi there, ho there, hidey ho there. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are ya? Thank you for joining us. Nice to have you with us. Vijay Lakshman is here today. Vijay is many things. He is an author, video game creator, martial arts expert, and an all-around great and very intelligent guy. We have an interesting conversation. It's a full show interview. We get into some interesting topics of conversation, and it's a good interview. I hope you're going to enjoy it. Just one little footnote. Skype was being a little bit uncooperative, so there are a few places where it sort of does that. But I think most of it is good, and in case there's a spot where a word got dropped or something, you can probably fill in the blank on your own. If you like what we're doing, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/Douglas Coleman Show. And from there, you can be a sponsor and we'll play your ads on our show. That's patreon.com/Douglas Coleman Show. So, not too much time to chit-chat. We will be right back with Vijay Lakshman.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. You know, all you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EWPSproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me this spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Acclaimed author of Garden, Jane Yates brings you the first book in a new trilogy, Octopus Pirate, a story of a foundling who has unusual talents, such as the ability to communicate with octopuses. As a baby, he was washed up on an island off the Scottish mainland. An eccentric former nun who lives alone with cats brings him up. He joins a circus and narrowly escapes plots against him, flees to Cornwall, builds a replica pirate ship that's also an airship to travel back in time to fight real pirates. Get your copy today from Amazon, only 99 cents.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. See? Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Wrong hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Vijay Lakshman. Hi, Vijay, how are you?
I'm good, Doug. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I was really intrigued by your bio and wanted to have you on, so I'm glad you're here. The first thing is you grew up in Bangkok, Thailand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think my dad was trying. He had wanderlust in his genes, and that resulted in me being born not in India where he grew up.
Okay, so you're not Thai.
No, not at all. My parents are actually a mixed. I'm Indian, as far as I can tell, but the genetic placing when we did that little swab shows my father is actually from the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, Georgia.
Oh, wow. So you got your DNA all figured out, yeah?
Well, I got something figured out. Who knows what it leads to.
Well, okay, so you were born in Bangkok. How long did you live there?
I was there until about 6 years old, and then we moved from the southeast, South China Sea and tropical weather to Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I had never seen snow, and I literally thought Americans must be the greatest warriors because they all walk around with blades on their feet. I didn't realize those were ice skates. I'd never seen ice skates.
Well, it's amazing to go from Bangkok. I've been to Thailand, and I've spent time there. But, yeah, it's definitely sultry and humid and hot and drippy. And if you go to Wisconsin in the winter when it's 40 or 50 below zero, yeah, that has to be a shock. Did you like the cold weather?
It was so new to me, and when you're a kid, snow is amazing. I loved everything about it. It wasn't. I didn't look at it the way I think adults do with driving and other issues. For me, it was sledding. I'd never done that before. Snowball fights and snowmen and things like that.
Well, you bring up a good point because it's one of the things that I've realized the difference between the young and the old is the young. The first priority is to be entertained. So snow is a great entertainment. When you get older, the first priority is to be comfortable. And snow definitely does not add to your comfort level, especially if you have to drive in it or walk in it or shovel it. Absolutely not. But so, yes, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that the winter time is a great time, for the kids. Christmas and snowmen and all that kind of stuff. Sledding is great. Some people like to ski. I don't know. Do you like skiing at all?
I was not a skier, but I did end up snowboarding quite a bit. And I'm fond of saying the first time I ever went snowboarding, I would have done better if I had just gone to the top of the hill, the mountain, thrown my board down and thrown myself after it. That was essentially my first half of the morning snowboarding, but I picked up pretty quickly. And, now I enjoy it. I did a lot of skateboarding and I found some of the skills to come back, in my middle age. And I agree with you, by the way. I think comfort is now reigning supreme in my life versus being entertained.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Absolutely. I found that out when I turned about 40. And I said, you know what, this is going out to the bar and seeing bands and it's just not interesting anymore. And thank God the internet came along because then now it's all on YouTube. So I could just sit there and watch it there. So you pretty much grew up in America then, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be right.
All right. Because, you have no accent at all for all intents and purposes. I think you are an American, yeah?
and yet I can falter the accent very easily.
Oh, well, okay. Well, now, does your father speak like that, or your mother?
Yeah, my father still has an accent. My mother is actually a language specialist, and now retired. I'm reasonably certain she worked for the CIA, so I'm not 100% sure.
Well, they won't tell
she
you.
speaks a number of different languages. So
They probably won't ever tell you.
she I don't know if she can, but I do know that listening to her speak one of the Indian dialects and then switch to one of the European languages, I don't detect anything but a very pure accent of whatever she's speaking. There's almost no, I can't detect Indian in her accent at all when she switches languages. So
how many languages does she speak?
I know of at least 11.
11?
She may in fact speak more. Yeah, she may in fact speak more than that. I think somewhere between 11 and 14.
That's incredible. That is absolutely amazing. Well, somebody like that would be very useful for the CIA, I think.
There was a time when she was writing flash reports for the office of the president. Each morning by reading the Southeast Asian newspapers and giving a brief on what was happening in that part of the world. So she had to be able to read a number of different languages, and I think that's probably where I got some of my talent in writing from. Just that predisposition to words and language stuff. So
okay, so how many languages can you speak then?
So I also got a predisposition to laziness. So I speak 3. I mean, I spoke 3 coming here. I spoke Thai, Tamil, and English. When I learned English, I forgot Thai. And then I learned Japanese. And then I took 7 years of Japanese. And that's when my laziness kicked in, never kept up with it. And so now I speak Tamil and English and nothing else.
Tamil, is that an Indian dialect?
Yeah, it's like of the 2 main dialects in India, Hindi and Tamil are the ones that you hear about the most. Hindi is obviously spoke all over the world. Tamil, I found, is very specific to sort of southern India and certain places in the Middle East.
What's the other one that I'm thinking of? Urdu?
Yeah, Urdu is like Farsi. That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and that's more northern and has more Arabic and that kind of area.
Okay, so you moved when you were a little kid, and then you developed some kind of a fascination with martial arts.
Yeah. So
when did you start?
Interestingly enough, yeah.
When did you start with martial arts?
Well, Thailand, Muay Thai fighting is one of the main, sort of pastimes. And, my father used to take me to all these different matches. When we came to the United States, strangely and maybe sadly, I don't know, I now consider it to be lucky. We came right after one of the last states to desegregate schools was Virginia. And we came here just a few years after that. And so I was met with quite a bit of sort of the tensions of the time. And I don't think people were ultimately very discerning between a little brown kid who's from India versus a little brown kid who's from Iran. And at the time was the Iranian oil crisis, if you remember. And so I ended up, constantly fighting. Like, I mean, every time on the way home from school, there'd be some gang of kids who wanted to beat me up. And my mom kept, saying, turn the other cheek, you don't need to fight. Screw that. And he had seen these guys training the martial arts, and he's a doctor, and in the back of the hospital in the loading area, they used to bring these chemicals in, and he used to watch them at lunchtime training, doing katas and practicing techniques. So he went to one of the guys there and said, hey, look, my son's getting beaten up all the time. Will you guys teach him? That guy said, Dr. Lakshman, have your son come to this address, blah, blah, blah. And just by happenstance, I happened to have been invited to one of the top tier martial arts schools in the world at the time, run by a grandmaster, Manny Agrella, who's a grandmaster. And he had no kids in the class. I was the only one. Everyone else was, I was 10 maybe or 8, and everyone else was, the next oldest one was 18.
Oh, wow.
And so, I fought adults. I started fighting adults, and he wouldn't change the system. He wouldn't make it easier on me. And so I just ended up learning how to fight using, my tiny size and quick wits and and the ability to run. And eventually, sadly for some of the people in the class, I grew into my body, and having started when I was about 9 or 10. By the time I was 17, I was, a lot of what they were just learning to do by practice was instinct for me. And so it was a nice and interesting time in my life. I got a lot of training, and I ended up training for close to 35 years.
30. Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So really long time.
What type of martial arts is this?
So my instructor it was a hard style of Chinese karate. He I think picked the Chinese style because of their. This is sort of technical. I don't know if you know anything about martial arts, but the way they teach it to you is via kata and techniques. And kata is like dance moves, right? But they're fighting moves that are strung together, and you have to sort of memorize them. And they train your legs and your hands and your stamina and things like that. And then there's fighting and sparring, and then there's actual technique. And the Chinese had a very deep tradition of kata and different techniques. The Japanese had a very hard style of attack and defense. And then if you look at things like judo and aikido, they had sort of using someone's power against them. He sort of merged all those together in one style. And I ended up learning, close-in combat grappling, how to defeat judo guys when they fight you, because they're dangerous if they get a hold of you. And, also how to beat karate guys, with their kicks and how to fight with my hands and my feet, and when to use what. It was a pretty interesting sort of hybrid system, and I got sort of lucky.
Is this similar to what Bruce Lee was doing?
No, I think Bruce Lee trained in something called Jeet Kune Do. It was a style that, ultimately, he had been trained by the Run Shaw brothers in Gung Fu. And Gung Fu, which is the precursor to Kung Fu, it just means to do something well. You could be a Kung Fu cook or a Kung Fu architect, right?
Oh, all right.
But obviously the style took on the the meaning of a martial art, and I think Bruce Lee did a lot in terms of just bringing it mainstream. He had trained with the Run Shaw brothers, as I said. He had then trained with Chuck Norris. He had quite a few different teachers in Hollywood. I think people recognized that there was opportunity to make money off of him. I don't know how much of what he did was him and how much of it was the movies. I can only say that the movies that I saw with him in them, I was pretty impressed. I mean, the things that he did timing wise and technique execution wise looked to me to be the real deal, and not something you see someone now today on like Power Rangers, where none of them have actually trained hardly at all. By the way they kick and punch. That is not true for Bruce Lee. When you look at him kick, whether he did a sliding side kick, a very traditional, karate technique, or a back fist, or even did some, that looked more like Wing Chun, he executed all of them very flawlessly, I thought. So, I was always happy to watch his movies.
Well, I thought it was interesting in one of the films, I think it was the biography film, the one starring Jason Scott Lee, and where he talked about when he was writing his book, when he had hurt his back, and it was like the whole thing about style was about having no style.
Yeah. What's interesting is I used to be told all the time, a very big observation I made was, when I started training when I was a kid, there were 7 basic techniques. It was a side kick, a roundhouse kick, a front kick, a back kick, reverse punch, back fist, ridge hand, things like that. They're not super complicated techniques. And then as I went up the ranks, you start learning all kinds of stuff. And when you go to tournaments, you start seeing guys throwing just crazy tornadoes, picking butterfly out of the air and monkey paw and whatever you want to, this crazy nomenclatures around, these odd, weird techniques and all. Then I got to the black belt ring, And in the black belt ring, after years of training, years and years, and I'm talking like in my case, 18,000 hours of training, right? We were in the ring, and what do I see? Back fist, side kick, roundhouse, reverse. It's the 7 techniques that every style, didn't matter what style you came up in, whether you were kung fu or karate or Shotokan or whatever, everyone used the same techniques because ultimately all the training did was filter you through all the junk and get you back to the basic techniques that work when it comes to fighting. And, these guys, it was not about crazy technique. It was about execution, right? The timing, execution. I mean, I was in a ring where we would watch you and we would time our punch to when you breathed in so that we could knock the wind out of you. That's the kind of training and timing we were going for.
It's all very interesting. What I think also is interesting, too, going back to your bio, is that as well as doing all of this martial arts, you were doing things like Dungeons and Dragons and RuneQuest. And to me, I find that interesting because the kids that I grew up with, I remember in high school, Dungeons and Dragons was kind of coming out. Those kids were definitely not martial arts material. They were like, and I don't mean to stereotype, but they were like the geeky, nerdy kids with greasy hair and glasses that just hid in a dark room somewhere and played these games for days. Right. And,
well, like I said, I didn't discover D&D until I got to high school. And, most of my under high school years were spent running away from bullies and training. and so by the time I got to high school, I could hide my geekdom really well. But, the fact is, you're right. I'm a super geek. And, what's interesting to me is my mother told me, this will never get you anywhere. You should be studying math and science. And I'm happy to say that my first job in the video games industry was because I could recite word for word, the monster manual in D&D, and I could, tell you what page on Traveler there was, the dice tables and things like that, and they were working, on a game where they were like, look, we're working on this game. Many people haven't heard of it, but if it's called Traveler, and I literally fell out of my chair because I played Traveler for 5 years all through high school. For me, it was a shoo-in on the job, on the job interview. So it did get me a job.
That's a great name for your character, Black Belt Super Geek. I think that's fantastic.
I'm gonna steal that. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. My pleasure. Okay, so I remember those games. I wasn't one that played them, but I was kind of, sort of curious about how they worked. But now speed it up to 2018, and you've created. How does this work? How does your game work? Is it virtual reality? I mean, is it one of those things with the helmet and the gloves and that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, are we talking about Mythborn or just the games in general?
Well, okay, let me just read this from your bio, and
Sure.
maybe give you a clue where my brain is, where my train of thought is going. It says, Vijay is working diligently on the design for a groundbreaking new interactive video game.
I know where you're going.
Okay, so just continue with that. How does this whole thing work, and how does it relate with, the old Dungeons and Dragons with the dice and you are now the Dragon Master thing? And
right. Well, what's really interesting is back in the old days, before computers had the power to do this, the way that they did it through storytelling. So that's what D&D is. D&D is a set of rules that allow people to tell stories more simply, like a codified set of rules that allow people to tell stories to their friends, and their friends can make decisions at decision points from the story, and by rolling dice, the outcome of that tells the storyteller, also called a game master, what to tell them in terms of the story unfolding. So you had these kids who had the ability to tell stories, but maybe not without any interruption. They needed like some feedback from the players and things like that. D&D gave them a codified system in which they could allow their imagination to grow, and then they could lead these kids through these really fun adventures.
Okay, well that gives me a better idea of what they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so video games, what they do is they do the same thing without the game master. The game master is the AI within the video game.
Okay.
And so the AI decides, here's 10 zombies. If you kill them all, you get some item, and that item will help you unlock a door on the other side of the map. That door will lead to a new adventure where you'll hear someone say something to you, or maybe a doctor will be there, cure, or whatever the story is that the writer's writing. I'm an author, and Mythborn, the story that I've just published, and it's award winning, it's doing really well. That story will be converted into a video game, and what you read in my bio, what it's saying is that when I started writing Mythborn, I had already completed 85 video game titles. Those titles had earned over $1 billion in lifetime revenue. And I learned the lessons of how to do interactive storytelling, which is different than just straight storytelling. Interactive storytelling has to take into account that you have these readers of your story who can change the outcome of the story by choosing to, do left instead of right, by choosing to, pick up one item versus picking up a different item. And so what Mythborn is going to do is create a world in which those choices can come to life, and people who've read my book, if they play the game, they may have some advantages, but more importantly, be able to see this world come to life in a way that they never could by reading a passive, non-interactive story.
Okay. I'm still trying to figure out, you would play this on a traditional game console?
That's right. So you could play it on a PS4, on an Xbox, 360 or Xbox One. You could play it on the PC. What I want to do is create an adventure where you create a character. Your character has certain traits and certain different parts to them that give them certain advantages and certain disadvantages. And then they find friends within my game world that you see the world unfold in front of you and visually. Yes, you could wear virtual goggles and look around and look up, and as you're joined by these companions, you go on adventures where the world sort of presents you challenges, presents you stories, and how you go about beating the challenges.
Okay, so that's the video game part of it. Now you've got a television pilot and a graphic novel as well. How is this going to work as a TV series?
Well, what's interesting is when I first started writing Mythborn, I did a trick that is used often, at least I've heard it's used in scripting for television shows. I put everything on an index card. Each scene, I put it on an index card and I put it up on my wall. And those scenes ended up becoming chapters. So I have about 100 chapters in the first book. And my goal is to make each chapter one show in a season. And so we have enough for about 5 seasons there, and maybe 6. And I think obviously we can edit things out, edit things down, expand things. There's a lot of meat for talented television writers to be able to translate into a television show.
Are you in serious talks with this right now?
Yeah, we've been dealing with a couple of different big players. I don't want to say who just yet. Mainly, I guess if any one of them hears, they may just want to know that we're talking to more than one.
That's good. Yeah.
And but I think what's been really great is because of the subject matter. And I'm happy to give you the one-liner or two-liners on the book story. But because of that, we've gotten interest not just from the television side, but also from the animated series side. So people do think this would probably make a very good animated series, and that'll be interesting for us.
And I guess I will hit one or two of the interview sample questions that were given. I do appreciate those. So if Danielle is listening, thank you for sending those. I do appreciate them. I just don't use them all the time because for 2 reasons. One, I kind of like to do what I feel works with the guest. And secondly, you've probably been asked these questions by 50 other people whose shows you've been on. And, perhaps you're just sick of these questions. But the one that I did like that I want to ask is the combat in Mythborn has been described as not typical fantasy swords and bashing. What does that mean?
Well, because of my background in fighting, what I found was the difference between someone who wins and someone who loses in competition oftentimes isn't about who threw or knows more techniques. It oftentimes is really just about how much is that person, how on is that person that day? You know, are they paying attention to what's going on? Are they dialed into their own ability to react? Are they feeling on top of the world, or did they, stay up too late, go out the night before, or, those kinds of things? So, and the difference, with 300 black belts competing, the difference between the guy who is first place and the guy who's last is still, tenths of a second. It may be hundredths of a second. It's not like I wouldn't want to fight any one of those guys in an alley if I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, just to be clear, they're all dangerous people. And I realized when I wanted to write Mythborn that and don't get me wrong, I love the fighting in Princess Bride, right? The long sword fight, and I'm not left-handed either. And I love that, right? There's a place for that in everything, I think. But what I wanted to write was something different. I wanted to write fantasy in which the fighting itself was more reminiscent and accurate to what I had experienced, which was really, really fast exchanges. And the guy who is not paying attention or is just not on that day makes the mistake, or girl. And if she makes a mistake, she's dead. There's not, I'm going to wound you. In general, people in my world, in Mythborn, they don't leave behind people to come back after them later.
Okay, you mentioned Mythborn world, and that's what I'm trying to picture in my mind right now. Mm-hmm. Is this like a fantasy land? I mean, is it non-human characters, I guess would be the way to put it?
Actually, no. So,
no. So they're not fighting dragons, and they're not fighting six-armed monsters and things like that?
Well, actually, they are, but not exactly. So to give you an idea of where I put everything together, my background is very varied, I should say, right? I have a really strong science background. I was on my way to medical school before I ended up becoming a video game designer. I believe in science. And I postulated in my head, what if this world, the world we're on right now, was the result of a terraforming accident by an advanced race, and their nanotechnology got loose. And that nanotechnology, in order to finish the world that it started, used the dreams of its colonists. And those dreams, those myths, they're what resulted in the religions of our world today. Those heroes, those deities, those gods, they were real at one point. They were nanite-like sentient beings that ultimately perished. But during that golden age, or during that age, eons ago, the world that we know today, the myths that we know today, they're our ancestral memories of a time when this planet was being colonized. And if that's true at that time, what kind of fantastic creatures and myths and legends what would you face? And the story simply boils down to, it starts very small. A kid who's training to be an assassin finds out that his master has been ordered to kill him in the next 8 days. And the first book just counts down those 8 days and what the kid tries to do, what he has to do to survive. But as he learns how to survive, as he figures things out, he also learns that he's part of a much bigger thing going on, this war for these sentient, for lack of a better word, sentient beings that are the result of people's dreams fighting for their freedom and not to be enslaved by those people who dream. And so now you see this war of heaven, the fall of Lucifer. All these different motifs are played out in this ancient world. And I think that's where I've gotten a lot of positivity in the reading, because it's based somewhat on interesting mythology and history.
Okay, so how advanced is the technology in this world?
The first quote in the book is from Arthur C. Clarke, and it says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's how advanced the technology is. It's advanced enough. It's advanced enough that nanites, you can't see them. They're microscopic. They're cellular size, but they're machines. They respond to thought. And if I said I want a glass of water, 1 billion nanites would reconfigure the air molecules into silicone and silicate and then glass, and they would grab hydrogen and oxygen atoms and combine them to create water and put it in the glass.
This game sounds way too advanced for me. I don't think I could handle it.
Well, the positive nature of video game designers today is we take very complicated things, and because of our experience, we make it really easy to play. And that's exactly where this will be going.
Well, okay, so I'm 56 years old, and I'm guessing you and I are around the same age.
Yeah, I'm 51.
Okay. But this game sounds like, an 11-year-old could master it. But for me, it would be, almost impossible, I think.
I'm not going to argue with you just because I'm feeling old, too, at times when I look at the games my kid's playing. The other day, my son is 5, and I see him at the window, and he's waving his hand to the left. And I'm like, what are you doing? And it turns out I realize he thinks that window is like a iPad screen, and he can just change the scenery by moving his hand.
Well, now he's got an imagination, yeah?
So evidently he didn't like what he was looking at out the window.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I want to just point the TV remote at the window too, and maybe it will just change. It's getting to be where it's indistinguishable. And there is some truth to that, because if you think about the progress of technology from the television to the computer, it's essentially one and the same thing now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about just the size of transistors, right? I mean, at one point, what's in a phone today took up an entire office building at NASA.
Right. Well, right? That was one of the interesting things from that movie, Apollo 13, where they said the processing capability of the module that they were in space is equivalent to an iPhone, or even less than an iPhone.
Less than an iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was
and we're looking at 17 or 21 nanometer chips now. So you're looking at transistors that are numbered in the billions on these single chip, these silicon wafers. That's crazy. At some point, it becomes so much that you are going to have a hard time distinguishing between sentience, right? The ability to sort of think about yourself in the abstract. For a computer versus a person, what's the difference between a biological cellular matrix and a silicone cellular matrix?
Wow, there's the movie, right? The Matrix?
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
That's the whole point. Or that was the concept, I guess. The point could be debated. But yeah, you're right. Well, so what do you think's going to be in 10 years, 20 years? What's going to be? Is there going to be a radical difference in what we have now?
I think that the main area of improvement that we're going to see is going to be in machine and biological interfaces. The fact is that we are getting to a point where print on demand, 3D printers are able to print. Yeah. They're able to print human organs. Right? We've seen a heart being printed. We've seen an ear being printed. I saw a report the other day that in Japan they had printed out skin that you could feel, touch from it.
Wow.
And that skin had been implanted onto a metal thing, but the way the fibers were set up, you could feel pressure and sensitivity and pain when you grab something with an artificial limb. I think we're going to see huge advances in the replacement of various body parts with, synthetic body parts that are, designed to look and act just as good as the human body parts. I don't think we're going to get to a point where the brain is replaced, but I do think we'll get to a point where normal organs will have some kind of synthetic analog, and really advance sort of the tier 2 of our longevity.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, because let's say hypothetically we get to the point where they can print a kidney for a lot of people that are on kidney dialysis. Okay, so they get their kidney replaced, but the rest of the body is still going to age. So the idea that you would live longer might not be true, because you'd have to replace all the parts, wouldn't you?
Well, what's interesting is my father has done quite a bit of research. He's a doctor, has done quite a bit of research on anti-aging. And one of the things that they've proven, you're right, by the way, just so you know, that cells have a pre-programmed timer on them in a long chain molecule called a telomerase. And every time the cell divides, the telomerase gets a little bit shorter, and when it gets below a certain length, that cell dies. Now, how do you stop the telomerase from dying, or how do you stop? Well, you stop the cell from dividing. How do you stop the cell from dividing or slow it down? You starve it. Basically, the more food you eat, the more your cells divide, and the older you get. So why do these old yogis and these old people who eat literally like it looks like a handful of food live so long? Because they're slowing their metabolism down to a point where their cells aren't dividing as quickly, because they're starving themselves of nutrient of energy, because sugar of any type, and that's what your body converts everything to. Everything you eat gets converted into glucose that your body can use as ATP in your cells. And if you starve it of that, then your cells don't do mitosis, and they don't divide. So that's one way to live longer. So I don't know how much fun it is.
Let's review that concept. So you're saying that if I want to live to be 150, I just don't eat, or eat very, very little?
I believe there's a strong correlation now between near starvation and longevity. You would have to supplement yourself with other nutrients that you aren't going to get if you aren't eating a lot. But yes, there's definitely a correlation between starvation and longevity. Well,
I agree with you that obese people tend not to live very long. And I'm one of these people who has to fight, weight gain. All I have to do is look at food and put on weight. And but let's bring up the other side of that coin, is exercise. Because by the same token, you need fuel to be active. The yogi that you're talking about, the mental image picture I have of the man meditating on the mountain, isn't the most physically active person in the room, typically.
I would agree. And I think ultimately what you have to ask yourself is, okay, so one thing proven absolutely beyond a doubt is that 80% of weight loss is in diet. It's not in exercise.
I would agree with that, having been on many diets in my life.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So that 20% exercise, it's designed to keep your various organs, in tip-top condition. It's designed to get rid of toxins. It's designed to sweat out the toxins and to get your circulatory system and your lymph system and everything else moving and washing your body out. But when you reduce the amount of food, reduces the amount of waste it's producing, the less you have to flush, the less you have to exercise. And frankly, one of the most highest calorie burning exercises you can do is thinking, right? I mean, your brain is by far the most user of calories. Your brain uses a ton of calories all day.
If that were true, I'd have the body of a young Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, the point is that ultimately, I think, could meditation and a low-calorie diet increase your longevity? Certainly. Does that mean you shouldn't exercise? No, I think there's two things you have to think about. It's not just enough to live long. If you live long, but you're so frail you can't move, there's a quality of life question also.
Well, that's
right?
very true, yeah. Yeah.
So there's I think ultimately what you have to do is there's some sweet spot where the two lines cross. One line is your starvation, capabilities, and the other line is your quality of life capabilities. And I think those two have to cross at some point that you're able and willing to sacrifice and still have a quality of life that you enjoy. And I think that's probably the most important thing.
And I think there is some DNA contribution to that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
If your family has a history of long life and pending any major abuse of your body, your chances are good that you will live around the same age as your parents or grandparents or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with that. I also think that ultimately, it's your outlook on life too. I think mental health goes a very long distance to keeping you healthy and happy. I think happiness, finding happiness in what you do every day, is such an important part of finding healthiness in your life, spiritually or just metaphysically. When I write, I'm in a different world, and I enjoy the way I feel doing it. You were talking earlier about just getting older. You don't do the things that that used to appeal to you. I used to be a big going out guy and drinking and blah blah blah. I don't drink anymore. I don't miss it. I enjoy writing. I enjoy being home with the kids, and I think that kind of stuff also adds a different kind of sort of mental focus on what's going on in people's lives. So people got to pick what they want to do, and it's all about trade-offs, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Everything's about trade-offs.
Well, it's funny you said that because I did pretty much the same thing. I quit drinking, and I drink essentially nothing alcoholic anymore. I think that I had a beer or two, 6 months ago or something. But, I used to drink essentially every night. And It was, Scotch whiskey. And on a good night, I could knock off a whole bottle and still be fine, But I learned that it just, at a certain point, it wasn't taking me where I wanted it to take me. Instead of going the high and everything is wonderful and I love you, everybody in the bar, and hugging and kissing, I went straight from sober to hungover.
Right. Right, with none of the great memories in between.
And I thought, what the hell's happening to my body now? My body couldn't take it anymore, I guess. So I just stopped, and I don't, like I said, like you said, I don't miss it. I don't miss it one bit.
And I think finding new interests. Like, I encourage everyone out there. I'm not suggesting that I'm the greatest writer in the world, or the greatest video game designer. There are people out there with huge talent, but there's that saying, and I'm just going to abuse it for a second. But they say if you do something you love, you don't work a day in your life. And I do think that there are a lot of people who, if they did and pursued what they loved, I suspect that their ability at it and their quality of life would go up. And I urge people to try and do that. It's a hard thing to do because of money and the different kinds of things that we have that are real everyday issues. But I think from the standpoint of the benefits that accrue to us, from a health standpoint and from a life standpoint, they're really positive, and those positive things allow us to be a positive contributor to society too.
Well, I think that's very true. I think people oftentimes take the wrong road in life, or take the road to survive rather than the road to pleasure and to happiness and self-fulfillment. But like you said, sometimes it's a necessity financially, and people kind of have to do what they have to do. But
I think, and that's
maybe at some point they can come back to it. That's what I did. I am a musician by passion and a songwriter, but I started out doing that when I was 18, and that went nowhere. And so I put it on hold for 20 years and got a real job, and then I was able to make enough money to come back to it. And then this show came out of that, and so it was been a nice adventure, I should say, a nice ride.
Yeah. Yeah, you never know where life will take you. I remember I was like I said, I was on my way to medical school, and I got a call from this video game company, and they wanted to know if I had applied to be a game designer, and they were like, "We don't need a game designer, but do you know what a producer does?" And I remember saying, "Yup, I totally know," and I had no idea what a producer did. I was like searching for books to teach me what a producer does, but I took the job, and it was one of those situations that just ended up opening a whole different direction in my life at 18, and now I look back at 51, and I'm just so lucky to have stumbled into something that I was happy to do every day.
Are you happy you didn't become a doctor?
I wouldn't say I'm happy I didn't become a doctor. I can see where now, with the hindsight of the years that I've spent, where I could have made a difference as a doctor in people's lives. Would the saving of one life be better than me having taken 35 million kids potentially out of school with my video games? I don't want to ask that question.
Well, I think you provided a different type of human fulfillment.
That's right, and that's the way I look at it. I think anything I had done, I did it because I wanted to better the human condition. I wanted to bring joy to people, and my writing is about that. My games are about that. When I left the games industry, I got into educational software, really trying to build companies that would help kids. I raised $19.5 million to build 3 different companies for the teaching of kids in very different aspects, and trying to pay back a little of the karma that I felt I might have gained in the video game industry. And so like I said, you never know what direction things are going to take you, but I've found times like this, when I get a chance to reminisce with someone articulate like you, and really sort of talk about life and books and science, and metaphysical things and religion, I think those are when you get a chance to take stock of what you're doing, and feel proud of the way you may have made a difference or contributed in your own small way to something that's better than yourself.
I agree, and I also think that regret is a real waste of time and energy. You can regret on a particular level, but you don't want to regret to the point where it stops you from moving forward, because that's just a complete waste of energy. It's like, okay, well, maybe I should have done that. And people who play the stock market learn that very quickly. Because if you say, well, geez, I should have bought Microsoft in 1987. Well, you didn't. So it's way, way too much energy expelled on nothing.
My father used to tell me, he said that wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. So I feel like I'm pretty blessed.
Well, that's about right. That's it. Yeah. And I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said the man who never makes a mistake is the man who's never done anything.
That's right.
So there's great sayings out there from your father and former presidents, and we got it all right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. Vijay, we got to wrap this up. The time just flew right by as we were talking. Mythborn, Fate of the Sovereign. Now, where is this at? Is it out? Or is it coming out, or where are we on the timeline?
So it's a 5-book series, and books 1, 2, and 3 are out and available on Amazon. You can go to Amazon or Google Mythborn, Mythborn, and I will come up. The books will come up. You can go to our website at Mythborn Media. That's Mythborn Media, mythbornmedia.com. You can also text Mythborn to 66866, and that will put you on our fan list, and you'll get the latest news there. So text Mythborn to 66866. And look, the Doug, I had such a great time talking to you. I want to thank you for taking time out to talk to me. And your questions were great. You have a fantastic voice, by the way. So
thank you.
it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure listening to you, even with these headphones on. I was so happy to have been included in this small part of your life. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. And what about the video game?
So we're in production right now for a story-based choose-your-own-adventure video game, which will be a precursor to the full game. I'm working with talented folks at Amazon on that. So imagine talking to your Alexa, and Alexa says, you walk into a room, blah, 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 blah. Do you want to get the sword, or do you want to go? And then you tell her what you want to do, and then she reads you the next part of the story. And we're trying to aim to have that out early next year.
Okay.
And then you'll see, the big versions of the game. Probably takes about 1.5 to 2 years to do that. So it'll be a little while. We'll keep everyone posted.
Okay. Do you have a personal website that you want to give out so people can come look at you or not?
Yeah. So we're on Facebook and, like I said, mythbornmedia.com.
Mythborn Media. Okay.
Yeah, mythbornmedia.com, and that's mythbornmedia.com. And you can see everything about me there. If you go on Facebook and type V Lakshman, Lakshman, or Mythborn, everything about us will come up, and me will come up, and that has links to my personal page and the rest. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. On Twitter, you can get me at V Mythborn, and on Instagram, same thing, V Mythborn. And write us, join our fan club. I'd be excited to speak with any fans. And I write and make video games so that you guys have something to do. So you're the reason I work. So feel free to let me know that you're enjoying stuff.
All right, Vijay. Listen, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was a real pleasure talking to you. And best of luck with all of your projects and with Mythborn. I hope it does really well.
Douglas, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Vijay Lakshman. This is Douglas Coleman saying I'll see you when I see you.